Hello everyone, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to today's English program. In today's episode, we will be discussing Unit 7 Grammar and Language Function for grade 11 students, and we will be going into much detail using examples to explain the concepts. Please join me after the break, and we will begin the episode together. Welcome back, students. As I said before the break, today we will be discussing Unit 7 Grammar and Language Function for grade 11 students. So without further ado, let's begin. First of all, we will begin with the concept of relative clauses and prefixes. Now, we should ask ourselves the question, what are relative pronouns? We need to ask ourselves these initial questions to then understand the concepts later on. So relative pronouns are used to link a relative clause to another part of a sentence. So they serve as a link between one part of the sentence and then the other part. So they have a very crucial task in a sentence. Now these are of course the key words that we need to keep in mind when dealing with relative pronouns. Who, where, whose, and which. And I suggest you write them down as I say them so that you can keep them in mind and even use them to practice later on. Now we will begin with looking at some sentences that will further elaborate and explain this concept. So you have this sentence here, I know Sarah. She always travels abroad. Now notice that these are two separate sentences. The first one, of course, is I know Sarah, period. And then she always travels abroad, another one. So what is a way in which we can link them together and create one sentence out of these two? So the answer is, I know Sarah who always travels abroad. Now remember the key words that I just explained to you. Who is used to talk about a person, and in this case, it is Sarah. Let's look at the second one. I met Tom. That's the first sentence. Tom was riding a bicycle. Now, which of the key words that I showed you in the beginning fit in this sentence that can serve as a link between both sentences? That's correct. It is once again who, because we are dealing with a subject, just like we did in the first set of sentences. So it would be, I met Tom who was riding a bicycle. So effortlessly, we created one sentence out of two. And here we see, of course, Tom riding a bicycle. Next one, John gave me a book. The book had some pages torn. So which of the keywords, once again, now you know the pattern, which of the keywords should be used in this context? It is in fact which. We are dealing with an inanimate object. John gave me a book which had some pages torn. So the book, of course, it is inanimate. It is not alive like Tom and Sarah. So we use the appropriate keyword, which is which. Next one, this is a cake. Mary baked this cake. So once again, we have a subject here, okay? And it is a person, and this person is alive. So which of the keywords should be used here? That is correct. It is in fact which, because we are taking the cake and emphasizing it at the beginning of the sentence. So this is the cake which Mary baked. The emphasis is not on Mary here, it is on the cake. And it has some references to the active and passive voice, this sentence. Now look at this. The cafe in Barcelona is still there. I met my friend in that cafe, and here we see a picture of a very quaint cafe where people come and enjoy their time. So once again, we have a set of two sentences, and we need to find a linking word to put them together. We need to find a relative pronoun to put them together. So what do you think is the way to go? Which is the most appropriate one? The answer we have here is, the cafe in Barcelona where I met my friend is still there. So we are dealing with a location, a place. A cafe which is in the city of Barcelona is the place where I met my friend. And of course the cafe is still there. It is still functioning, people still come to it. So of course the key word here is where. Next one, I live in a city, I study in the city. Same idea. So look at these two sentences. Which is the most appropriate one? It is in fact where, once again, because we're dealing with a location, the city, just like Barcelona. It talked about the cafe. So we add where to make it one sentence. Next one, I saw the boy. The boy's house was robbed. So let's look at the correct keyword. Whose. I saw the boy whose house was robbed. Now, whose indicates possession. When we use the word whose, we are indicating that the house belongs to the boy. So it has a very specific purpose in this sentence. So, of course, this is the answer. I saw the boy whose house was robbed. Now let's move on to relative pronouns and relative clauses. And let's look at some pieces of information related to this. I would like you to find the relative clauses in 3 of the following sentences and underline them. And pay attention because one of the sentences does not contain a relative clause. So just to throw you off, we have a sentence that does not contain a relative clause, but your job is to find the relative clauses in 3 of the following sentences. The first sentence is, John Logie Baird, who was a Scottish engineer, invented the world's first working television system. So that's the first one. And as we can see, highlighted is the relative clause. You can tell by the commas that it is designated from the sentence and that it is the clause that is added into the sentence. The second sentence, his early achievements, which demonstrated working television broadcasts, earned him a prominent place in the invention of television. Now, if you notice, the relative clause explains the word that comes after it. So here, with achievements, it goes on, the relative clause goes on to explain what the achievements demonstrate. They demonstrate working television broadcasts. So of course, relative clauses have that purpose. They have the purpose of taking something and explaining it further. So if we look at the first sentence, John Logie Baird, the relative clause goes on to explain who he is. He is a Scottish engineer. So we need to keep this in mind, that the relative clause gives us more detail, gives us extra information that we need to understand who a person is or what something does or what have you. Let's look at the third sentence and the fourth together. In the 1920s, Baird set up the Baird Television Development Company Limited when he made the first transatlantic television transmission from London to New York. And 4, Baird produced a live moving grayscale television image from reflected light. Now, if we look at the sentence that is highlighted in the third one, we notice that it is not really essential in that if it was removed from the sentence, we still have a very coherent, meaningful sentence. So if it was read in the 1920s, Baird set up the Baird Television Development Company Limited, and we stop there, it does not affect the rest of the sentence if the relative clause was removed. So some relative clauses are important to have in the sentence and others can be removed. So it is not really essential information, just added or extra information. And the fourth one, of course, Baird produced a live moving grayscale television image from reflected light. So these are just examples of how relative clauses are used in sentences to add information and just give us more detail to understand something. Next, let's look at some prefixes. Now, what is a prefix? We need to, of course, initially ask this question to ourselves. A prefix is a letter or a group of letters added to the beginning of a word to make a new word. So the English language is rich with prefixes, and of course you have suffixes which come at the end of a sentence. But now we are dealing with prefixes. With prefixes, we add them to the beginning of words to make new words, to give new meanings. So here the example we have, it says, in the word unhappy, un is a prefix. So un, which is made up of the letters U and N, are added to happy to give the opposite of happy, which is unhappy. And another word for that, of course, is sad. Now the prefix telly, and it has a lot to do with the lesson in Unit 7. So we're going to look at it in more detail. Telly means over a long distance. So when something is done over a long distance, we call it telly. For example, a phone, it is a telephone because you are talking to people over a very long distance. You can be in different places around the world, but you are communicating with them over a very long distance using this device. So now you add the prefix tele to these words to come up with new words, and of course you may also need some changes in the words. So here's a very clear example that everyone knows about, telephone. So now that we looked at the first example, telephone, let's look at some others, a way in which tele as a prefix is used in front of different words to give various meanings. So here's one, teletext, which is written information which you can read on a TV screen. So if you're watching television and you see words come across the screen, this is teletext. This is text that is written on a TV screen. So we have a specific word for that, teletext. Television is a means of sending images and sounds by electrical signals. So everyone knows a television, of course. If we took out tele, it would be vision, which is seeing, using your eyes to see. Television is seeing using sounds and, of course, images, moving images. So these are television is very familiar to us. Teletext might be a newer concept. A teleprinter, here's something else, is a type of electric printer for sending and receiving messages down a telephone line. It is also called a telex. So to shorten it, it is also called a telex. So a teleprinter, most people might not know about it, but it is an electric printer, of course, and you receive and send messages through a telephone line. So it is probably a type of technology that people have not caught on to that much, as there are easier ways to communicate. And telecommunication, the sending and receiving of messages over distance, especially by telephone, radio, or television. Anywhere in the world now, there are telecommunication companies, and here in Kuwait we have Zain and Wataniya. They are in the business of getting people to communicate with one another over long distances, and primarily using telephones and mobile phones. Now what I'd like you to do, we're going to have a short exercise together to test your knowledge of some of these words and related, of course, to the unit. So look at the words at the top, and we're going to be using them to fill in the spaces in the following sentences. So let's look at the first sentence together. Ahmed's parents are very proud of him because he's an blank young man. So why would the parents be proud of him? What is something in him that would make the parents proud? Look at the words. We have antiviral, we have independent, forerunner, teleworking, and disagreement. So what would the person have to be? Of course, we are looking for an adjective here. So the most appropriate one, or the correct one rather, is, that's correct, independent, which means that he does not need to depend on anyone to get things done, which is of course the goal of every parent. Next one, if you do your job at home and communicate with your office by computer or phone, then you are, I'll give you a hint, it should have a prefix. The answer should have a prefix, and it is a prefix that we have been looking at in detail over the last few slides. So based on that, that's correct. It is teleworking. So if you are working from home and talking to someone on the computer or the telephone to get things done, you are actually teleworking. So you are working over a long distance. You are talking to someone to get your work done. Number 3, the meeting unfortunately ended in, what do you think? Ended in, look at the words at the top. It should be a consequence. So it ended, unfortunately, of course, we have a keyword here that gives us the answer. So unfortunately means that something bad happened. So based on that, the answer is disagreement. So the members of the meeting or the people sitting in the meeting didn't really agree with one another. There was a bit of a problem. And the last one, number 4, this medicine is, and blank treatment, it will definitely make you better. So we need something that fights viruses and fights diseases, and the only correct answer, of course, is antiviral. Antiviral. And of course, we have an extra word here, which is forerunner. So I hope you found this exercise useful. And now we'd like to move on to the second part of this episode, which is language function. Let's begin by talking about the different ways in which you can express yourself using language function. The first way is expressing likes and dislikes. And some of the things you can say when you want to express whether you like something or whether you don't is, number 1, I prefer something to something else. So for example, I prefer playing outside to staying indoors. So that is an example. I like something more than something else. So I like spaghetti more than rice, for example. I'd rather do this than do that. And here is an example to make it clearer to you. I prefer cleaning to cooking. So you prefer something. Next is giving reasons. And here are some of the things you can say. One of the reasons for something. The first reason, and you start stating the reason, and the second reason, and you keep going on and on. And the example here is, the reason I like this sport is because it stretches my whole body. So there is a reason why you like something. Of course, you have to justify yourself whenever you give an opinion or you talk about something that you like. Next, we have stating advantages and disadvantages, and we do this a lot in the English language. We need to state why something is good for us, and then we talk about why something is not good for us. And some of the ways in which we can express ourselves is the pros and cons, which is another way of saying advantages and disadvantages, are. So we begin to list them. And then what's good about, and here is, of course, an example. What's good about this device is speed and control. So you talk about what is good about this device. What makes it better than every other device? What sets it apart? So of course, it is very useful to state the reasons why something is good, and on the other hand, why something is bad. Next, we look at expressing opinions. A very crucial part of mastering any language, not just the English language, is being able to express yourself, not just going by the textbook. So some things you can say is, I think, I believe, in my opinion, as I see it, from my point of view. So this all indicates that you are talking about your thoughts, your convictions. So these are very useful phrases that you can begin your sentence with. An example would be, in my opinion, Avatar is a nice movie. So of course, you would then maybe go on to explain why you think it's a good movie, but this is you stating your opinion. You think that it's a good movie. You've seen it and you think it's a good movie. And now let's move on to another way in which we can use language function to express ourselves, and that is persuading. Now, I'd like to talk a bit about why persuading is important. Of course, when we move on into academia, and of course, while we're at school, we need to learn how to be able to persuade the person in front of us and be able to give good reasons. Oftentimes, we give irrational responses, but we need to make sure to persuade in a way that is logical. So ways in which to do that, or phrases that you can use to do that, is how would you feel if? So how would you feel if something happens in a certain way, or how would you feel if, I said this or did that? Okay, just think what would happen if. Okay, so what would happen if there was no global warming? Of course, no one is going to disagree with you, but there can be other examples in which people do disagree with you. So you would have to take your time and explain to them why you believe in a certain cause. And the last one, surely it is unacceptable that, for example, animals are used for testing. So, for example, a lot of people are against animal testing and they don't believe that it can be used because animals are harmed and they believe that they have rights. So persuading really gets into very hot topics. But if you use very good and researched reasons and opinions, then you ultimately will persuade the person in front of you. An example, of course, is just think about what you can do with this app. So imagine you're trying to convince your friend that they can use a certain app and it would really benefit them. So you would just say, just think about what you can do with this app. So it's really the wording and how you phrase your sentences that can get people to be persuaded with your opinion. And now that we've looked at all the ways in which we can express ourselves using language function, let's look at these situations, and I want you to really think about what would be the most appropriate response. And the best way to do that is imagine as if you were in that situation, you were put into that situation, and you are being faced with responding to it. So let's begin with the first situation. It reads, the waiter in a restaurant is asking you if you would like soft drinks with your meal. Of course, we all go through this. We've been to a lot of restaurants. The Kuwaiti scene is very big now. There are so many restaurants in Kuwait and a lot more opening. So imagine you're sitting in a restaurant and your waiter asks what you would prefer or what would you would like for your drinks, if you would like soft drinks to go along with your meal. So what would be the most appropriate answer based on your preference, of course? But here we're sharing examples, but of course it would depend on what you would like to have. So here, the one we have here is, I prefer drinking water to soft drinks, thank you. So I would not really like soft drinks, and I would like to have some water instead, but thank you for your suggestion. Okay. The second situation, your parents are asking you about the reasons behind your choice for the College of Education. So you are graduating from high school, you decide to go on to study at the College of Education, and your parents want to know why. So you need to justify yourself and explain why you would like to go to the College of Education. There are so many reasons, of course, why we decide to go to a certain place and not another. And the example response we have here is, one of the reasons is my English teacher. So my English teacher may have encouraged me, or when I saw how she taught in class, I really was very fond of being a teacher. So there could be multiple reasons, and this is just one of them. Now let's look at the picture we have at the end of the slide. And we notice, of course, a student coming in and the teacher sitting on the desk. A very familiar scenario that you must have gone through at school. You would come in and see your teacher and talk to them. So teachers really have a big influence on what you eventually do in the future. So here we see, of course, an English class, the student coming in, talking to the teacher. And just like this could be a reason, there could be so many other reasons that you decided to go to a certain place. It might be that the college has a very good reputation, has very good programs. So the emphasis really is on the fact that you can choose any response that makes sense to you in language function. Now let's look at the third question together. Your friend wants to live in the country. So your friend, imagine they're having a hard time living in the city, there's a lot of stress, a lot of pressure, and they decide to move to the country where it's a lot quieter. So what is something that you would say to your friend in this situation? How would you respond in this situation? Of course, once again, we have a response, but there can be others based on what you think is correct. Here we have one of the pros of living in the country is its quietness. So the advantage of living in the country, as I've said, is that it is a lot more simpler, it's quiet, you lead a very simplistic life. So this is, of course, one of the pros. There are so many others, of course. You get to maybe focus on things that you can't do in the city because you're so stressed and you want to get things done quicker. But when you're living in the country, you have a lot more time to do things you really want to do. So that's another reason you can add. And there are so many other responses that you can give. Okay, so as I've said, of course, there are so many other responses we can give as advantages to living in the country. And here's a picture that shows us the quintessential countryside life. You go to this place and you feel very serene, you feel very comfortable. So when your friend wants to move to the country, of course, it wouldn't be wise to stand in their way because it's for the best, you know, leaving the country and going away for a while and getting away from the stress. And the fourth question is, your friend believes in aliens. Now, aliens, of course, are, as people believe, creatures that come from other galaxies. So if your friend comes to you one day and says, I believe in aliens, and we know that some people around the world have seen UFOs, which are unidentified flying objects, which are the spacecrafts that aliens travel in, presumably. So what would you say to your friend in this situation? Let's look at the response we have here. I don't really think they exist. I don't think they exist. That could be your belief. And if you were the sort of person who does believe in aliens as well, you can say, yes, I believe in them as well. So there really are no limitations as long as you make sense in language function. If you give a proper, logical, meaningful response, then you will be getting a good grade. So this could be a response. There can be so many others. And of course, here we have a picture of an alien, or how people think they look like. We don't really know if they exist. So That's this situation. Let's move to the fifth one. Your sister is for cutting trees to building houses. Now the word for here indicates that your sister is for, or she is agreeing with, or she believes that this should happen, cutting trees to building houses. And it's a real problem in countries where there are a lot of forests. They're cutting down trees, there's a lot of deforestation to make way for buildings and ultimately cities. So based on your beliefs and what you believe in as a person, what would you say to her? What would be the correct response, or your response, if you have, of course, the reasons to back it up? Here we have, just think what would happen to the animals. So you're trying to persuade her that what you think is incorrect. What would happen to the animals who have habitats, who live in these forests, who live in these lush green places? What would happen to them if you cut down their trees? They have nowhere to go, and they eventually die. So you need to be very firm and very straightforward when you try to persuade someone of something. So this could be one response. You can give so many others. It could affect the air. It can lead to pollution. So noise pollution, air pollution, there's so many types. So there are so many ways in which you can support your opinion. And of course here we see someone asking someone else, why are you cutting these beautiful trees? And the person says, sir, the government has selected this place for making up an office building to teach and assist people how to stop deforestation. So there's a lot of irony that you're cutting down trees to build an office that will teach people how to stop deforestation. So of course, we don't want to be in any of those situations. So with that, we come to the very end of our episode. I really hope you benefited and were able to find a lot of good things to take away from this lesson. Please join us again in future episodes, and it will be a pleasure to see you again. Thank you.